Hello and welcome to the Game Business Show. This week it is the fastest selling console of all time, but are third-party publishers seeing the benefit of Nintendo Switch 2? We dig into the big Summer Game Fest numbers, plus we look at some of the key news stories of the week, including Xbox's partnership with AMD, Mindseye launches and falls over, and an agreement is reached between SAG-AFTRA and the video game industry. But first, let me introduce our guest host for this week. It's none other than the former Polygon editor-in-chief and now founder and host of Post Games. It's Chris Plante. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Chris, fill me in. Last time we spoke, you were still at Polygon.
Yes.
What's happened? What is Post Games? What are you up to?
That's a great question. Briefly on Polygon. Polygon used to be a Vox Media company. Now it is a Valnet company. I used to work for it. I no longer work for it. But the, I guess, more interesting thing at this point for me is Post Games, which is this show that I've launched, and maybe you can relate to this, or anybody who goes really deep into management at some point in their career. You always have this fantasy of, oh yeah, but if I ever went back to the old thing, this is what I would do. Oh, I would go back and I'd be a critic, or I'd go back and I'd be a reporter. It's one of the funny things that happens in journalism is you get really good at something and then you manage your way out of doing that every day. And this is the show that I had wanted to make for a really, really, really long time. And finally had the time and space to do it and to kind of take that risk. And then the show itself is just a weekly audio magazine. You launched ahead of me and made it way less stressful for me. Our shows are very different, and especially in, I think, their target audience. But you really showed a version of this weekly news show that reminded me of the sort of thing that I would expect to hear on the BBC or on NPR, where I'm like, I know I'm going to learn every time I tune into it. And I also know I'm going to have a really nice time learning, that it's not just going to be, watching the paint dry. My target audience is 30 to 60-year-olds who love video games, but now have kids and have maybe a half hour a week when they can really get caught up. And I really want to make sure that half hour to an hour that they're getting as much info as possible and that they're really, really enjoying themselves and that it's really, really well produced. There are a lot of great shows out there that are for people talking and finding their ideas. I do one of them. It's called The Besties. I'll plug that too. But I feel like there are fewer of these shows where the creator is, writing a script, really planning out the beats of the episode, having a topic, having a theme. And that's what I've been setting out to do.
I was worried there you were going to say, I heard your show and I thought, I can do better than that. That's fine.
Definitely not that. Definitely have more stress. I was like, ah, damn, now I have to make it good.
No, we're seeing that media shift, aren't we? Which is, there is an increasing number of these. You talked about, I never really wanted to be the publisher of gamesindustry.biz or whatever my job title was in the end, head of gamesindustry.biz. I was given this situation back in 2017, I think it was, where the boss of Gamer Network at the time, Rupert Lohman, said to me, Chris, we're making some changes. We want to put you in charge of gamesindustry.biz. And at the time, I thought that meant editor-in-chief. And I was like, oh, great, amazing. And he said, so we'd like to make you publisher. And I went, can I not be publisher? Because publishers, they deal with the commercial side of things, the event side. I don't mind doing the event side of things. I've got a commercial brain, but I didn't, that's not gets me out of bed in the morning. And he said, you could do that, but we'd still have to put a publisher in above you if you did that. And I was like, I had to choose between being in charge and doing.
Yeah.
In the end, I negotiated a weird middle ground. But it was the thought of going back to editorial writing and talking about the things I like to do, all, that I think is interesting and that I like to learn about as much as I like to report on all the time, was a big driving force actually behind doing this, and not having to run another Best Places to Work awards, which is a project I'm really proud of, but I did 12 of them. And it's a lot of work and it's a lot of management and it's a lot of staff. It's a lot of meetings and I'm not saying this is necessarily easier. It's actually, I think it's harder, but it's more enjoyable.
I think it also speaks to the trend towards independent, or at least just smaller creative ventures, because the overhead on these and the way that the internet has warped the revenue systems for these businesses has made it so that you can have a lot of great ideas. You can get into a place of power at a publisher, and yet that power is constrained by the increasingly difficult challenge of making money.
Yeah.
It used to be, you know, with the newspaper, there were all these different revenue streams. And then, yeah, you had some of the work that was really tough and laborious, but you also had a lot of like the prestige work, the stuff that you got into it for, the stuff that's really going to be helping people. And that becomes harder and harder as the ad dollars, you know, dwindle, and there is less opportunity to do those sorts of editorial projects.
Yeah, in my case, the team had got smaller. We still had to do all the commercial stuff, the stuff that was generating revenue.
Yeah.
But we reduced time on everything else. But this is what I love about Post Games, is that every show that you've done so far is really creative. Like they're stories that are, or angles on stories that haven't been, like the latest one on AI was inspired in many ways. Like I haven't seen stuff like that. And that's what this independent, that's the positive side. There's a negative side, I think, in that when we've got a load of individuals doing things, it sort of, I worry about the talent progression and bringing things to the industry and the growth of the media space, or the lack of it, which is where I'm worried. But it does allow for this sort of level of creativity and for it to be an affordable thing to do, because you can lean on your readers, I guess, to fund it. But anyway, sorry, I got distracted by saying I think it's a really creative show with some really, I can say, I said to you just before we press record, I thought there must be pressure on you to keep coming up with another creative concept and in pulling it all together in a show. It's excellent to hear.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, in terms of like the pressure, before I started work on a single episode, I mapped out a year of topics.
Oh, really?
And like just knew, like, I know I want to do these. These are stories that I live for. And, you know, as life happens, you start throwing stuff in there. And now that's probably about like a year and a half. It's just because stuff keeps getting bumped. And do I think I'll hit all those topics? No. Do I think I'll have interest in all of them by the end? No. Do I think each of them is actually newsworthy once I get around to them? No. But I knew that I would only want to do a thing like this and really, you know, bet my life on it, quite frankly. If one, I thought there was enough out there that would interest people, and two, that I would not lose momentum or enthusiasm, right? So far, yeah, I've done, well, now I'm about to do a second episode on AI that's kind of a two-parter. I've talked about sex or lewd games, and I have some stuff coming up that I'm really excited about. There's a Broadway composer who is taking a leave from being a composer to create a video game, and I can't wait to tell this story, right? And it's a lot each week. I am producing between an hour and a half of audio content that's like pretty produced each week, but it's so much easier when it's a story that you want to tell. And like the second I wrap on one, I'm like, oh, great. Now I can go do that one that I'm still excited about. We should talk again in like 6 months and see where I am. But right now, I haven't lost like any of that fuel or that momentum.
Well, now I bring you on to a business podcast, so hopefully
I love it.
This doesn't drain.
I live for this stuff. I love, I was just at SGF and I love, I'm a journalist. I'm a professional gossip. So I love talking the biz side of things.
So yeah, I missed you at Summer Game Fest. I was obviously still there as well.
I know.
We did a show last week, which was a bit of a reaction show to it. I mean, I've got some numbers about it and we'll talk about those in a moment. But did you see much? Was there anything that inspired you out there? Obviously you don't want to spoil forthcoming post-game shows, but... Yeah,
I mean, happy to talk about it. The two things that like really stood out to me personally, and not talking like, do I think these things will be successful, was Pragmata, the Capcom action/shooter/puzzle game. A great thing about doing this for so long is you can see the future in some way. And I worry a little bit about my visions for this game, which is I put the controller down and I was like, I can't wait to talk about this game in 10 years when everybody decides they love it. I don't know if anybody's going to buy it when it comes out, but holy moly, does it have a mid-2000s Sega vibe to it, and I adored it. And then the other one, I can't remember if you talked about this last week, was Ambrosia Sky.
No.
The new game from Soft Rains. And Soft Rains, for people who don't know, it's a new studio, but with a lot of talent. My friend Joel Burgess runs it, former Bethesda, former Ubisoft. And it has a very, I don't know, somewhere like Prey, I guess is the game that comes to mind.
Oh, okay.
Arcane, but with some really great story. One of the writers on the story did oh dang, is it Mortician's Tale? I think is the right name of it. But it was this fantastic indie game about basically the funeral business. A Mortician's Tale. And this game is also dealing with death in some very interesting ways, and I kind of can't wait for it.
Oh, wow. Well, I can come on to Pragmata because I do have some positive statistics about it.
Yeah?
It reminded me of PNO3 and Vanquish and that sort of Capcom-y sci-fi thing. And I really enjoyed the combat as well. It's interesting, though, a couple of people I've talked to had the exact opposite reaction to Pragmata. But most people I spoke to had the same reaction that you did, which is was one of the best things that I played at the show. Well, there's some statistics. Some of these statistics are already out there. It's worth remembering that the game business is co-founded by Jeff Keighley.
I've heard of him.
And I'm here talking about the performance of Summer Game Fest. I'd love to tell you that I'm completely an independent voice in this. I'll try to be, but there is an element of inevitably a slight bias there. But the numbers are the numbers. And if you talk about the Summer Game Fest showcase itself, which I never quite remember the actual name of it, I think it's just called the Summer Game Fest Showcase. It had 50 million views collectively. I don't quite know how they worked that out. It's not quite the Game Awards numbers, but it's a huge number. It's actually the second biggest showcase this year behind the Switch 2 reveal, which sounds pretty impressive. They say it's an 89% year-over-year peak viewership growth. If you look at Level Up Analytics, they've done a lot of comparisons here to try and give us a bit of a sense of what does that number actually mean.
Yeah.
They say the peak viewership is 3 million. And compared to other showcases during that week, so that Summer Showcase event, 3 million peak viewers is ahead of Xbox, which had 2.2 million peak views, and the PlayStation State of Play event, which is just behind it on 2.1 million. If you look at the year before, the opening events of the Summer Game Fest Showcase in 2024 had 2.3 million peak viewers. It's a big jump on that, and it's even a jump on the 2.5 million that was recorded in 2023, which was the previous record. So Jeff is understandably pleased. About that number. If I look at the other showcases, the Xbox Showcase was weaker this year. Last year's showcase had 2.7 million, which was the previous record actually for the whole Summer Game Fest period. But of course, last year's Xbox Showcase was the big Activision, Xbox, Bethesda crossover with Gears of War, Fable, Doom, lots of big games. It was a big hype. It was being hyped up quite a bit. And this year's one I thought was great. Loads of interesting games in it, but a little bit less dramatic in terms of sort of AAA attention. Actually, Sony's State of Play this year did slightly better than last year. It did 2 million last year peak viewers, and this year it was 2.1 million. So overall, when it comes to the direct-to-consumer stuff, lots of people watched, it seems like.
Yeah.
And I think people are becoming tuned into those. Did you watch all of them, Chris, or do you sort of catch up afterwards?
There were, I think, roughly 50 of these. So I didn't see all of them. I admired the people I saw in Blue Sky who were doing that service for everyone. I'll be very honest. I don't have a tremendous amount of interest in this window of trailer releases. And the reason is I don't find it to be the moment when big companies reveal their best. Like whatever, like big surprise twist. I feel like this is, for me, the middle tier of things. And I think there's a pretty clear reason for that, which is companies now have access to their fans via all these different directs. So if they really want to make a big splash, they don't want to do it when everybody else is hopping into the pool. That said, what I adore about this change is I think that's better for the industry all around. I think it is better that we have discrete moments, that we're not doing this thing that only made sense when we needed to get video games in the New York Times that one time that they would get there each year, right? Like that was a function that E3 served, of get everybody in the same room. It just feels, the idea of having to do it all at once, for me, feels like a bit of a relic. That said, still wonderful to see everybody. I will say this about SGF and what I've heard from people who program there. People love it, who are on the game publisher side. Mm-hmm. And I'm not tied to Jeff, so I'm happy to say this. Like you will talk to people from, I'm not going to name names, but from different game development studios, and they will talk about the turnkey nature of it. That you come in, you pay a pretty reasonable set fee. You can pay a little extra, and they even do some decorations for you.
Oh, yeah.
That it's all ready for when you get there. And I've used to work E3, and working it was a nightmare. I mean, having to get fabricators, having to get all these different, vendors, having to set up, to build, to break down. really was a truly a miserable experience. And that was for pretty small stations that I worked at. For these bigger things, it just cost a fortune and it was a headache. And this just feels like a much better setup, at least for the relationship between the press and the publishers.
Yeah, so you're talking about play days specifically, right?
Yeah.
I hear the same thing. E3 was LACC, which had its unions. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't even move things from one part of the building to the other without having to use one of their union workers to do that, which always ramped up the costs of these things, made it, the year E3 got cancelled, the cost of booking a booth at E3 was less than almost every other video game event. But when you factor in all the costs that come with it, it immediately skyrockets above it. And of course, by doing it in the location they did it, which is a kind of nice location when you're in the location. Around it is not so nice. But it's, it doesn't have any of that. And yeah, it's quite turnkey. I mean, when it comes to announcement events, I do sometimes I think I always find it very hard when I sit through stuff where I've got a certain preference in video games. So when I watch a Nintendo Direct, I almost certainly always enjoy it because I'm just a big Nintendo fan. So I like most of the stuff I see there.
Yeah.
I go to Summer Game Fest. I like certain Xbox games, but I don't like all of them. Same with PlayStation. As an individual trying to enjoy these things, I find it a little bit, I can find it a little bit hard. And in actual fact, I kind of like the fact I can sort of skip over. It's a retro Japanese RPG. I'll skip over this one. Those sort of things. And it's not that I think everyone could do that. I think that's kind of interesting. I did think there was a bit of variety this year. I say that. There was a lot of games. There was a lot of online multiplayer shooters that looked a little bit cartoony. There was a lot of grim, dark, sort of Souls-like games. Oddly, there was a lot of weirdly animated sort of cartoony games, I think probably Cuphead-inspired stuff. There was a lot of licensed stuff, actually. Game of Thrones, Dune, James Bond, obviously, Lego stuff. And obviously lots and lots of retro stuff. But I actually thought when you started looking at all the different buckets they sat in, even this one set in the 1940s, I did get quite a lot of variety. There was also a lot of similar looking things, which obviously is part of the... you asked about Pragmata.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll start with trailers, right? None of these numbers are going to surprise you. The biggest trailer of Summer Game Fest was Call of Duty Black Ops 7. According to Level Up, it generated over 85.3 million views, but it was neck and neck with Resident Evil Requiem, which managed 84.6 million views. Resident Evil Requiem, I felt, was like the sort of standout surprise announcement of that event. Even though we thought it might be there, they did a great job of tricking us into thinking it wasn't going to be. The one after that wasn't actually a game demo at all. It was the Witcher 4 and Unreal Engine 5 tech demo, which actually kicked off the whole period, if you count Epic State of Unreal address. That had 67.2 million trailer views. And number 5 was the Xbox hardware, the ROG Xbox Ally. I'm just going to call it Xbox handhelds. They did over 50 million views. Other games, Marvel's Tokon was the number 5 most viewed trailer. Sea of Remnants did really well, which was interesting, 37.4 million. Persona 4 Revival, 26.2 million. Then it's James Bond, 24.7 million. Deadpool VR, 24.4 million. And rounding off the top 10 was the year 3 character reveal for Street Fighter 6 with 24.2 million.
Wow.
Trailer views. So those were the top sort of performing. And I'm not surprised by those. I was going to do a big deep dive analysis into wish lists and followers on Steam, but Simon Carlos did that over at Game Discover, so I'm just going to quote him.
Fantastic.
Resident Evil Requiem was the big winner on Steam as well. It was new on Steam that week. It hadn't been on there previously. It immediately went to nearly 30,000 followers, nearly 620,000 wish lists. So it was number 1 regard. But number 2 was most wish listed was Pragmata, just shy of 350,000. I think Capcom games just do tend to do very well with that sort of audience.
Yeah.
And it's been awaited for a while. There was some positive press around it. I think that certainly helped. Other big games in the wish list, Atomic Heart 2 is in there, Grounded 2 is in there. I'm not surprised. Sequels to games for established audiences, really. There were, though, a couple of surprises. Do you remember the body horror game Ill?
Yeah.
It was the 3rd most followed game on Steam and the 4th most wish-listed game of the show on Steam as well.
Wow.
So that's Game Discover data. I wouldn't have predicted that at all. It was actually the 12th most viewed trailer as well. It got more people viewed, that trailer, than Silent Hill F trailer. Just about. It was quite close, but I thought that looked great. So that's a game by Team Clout. They should be pretty happy, I imagine, with those.
Yeah. I mean, this is classic Steam. In that, I have not heard of this. Oh, it's the most popular thing? Oh, it looks pretty good. Sure. Again, when 1,000 games get shown in a week, I guess this is what happens.
Yeah. Well, the other one, and this wasn't even shown during the bigger well, it was shown during the Future Games Show, which is popular, but it's a lower profile. That's the sixth biggest showcase of the Summer Game Fest period, behind PC Gaming Show, behind Day of the Devs as well. But they had a game on their stage called The Expanse: Osiris Reborn.
Yeah.
It was actually the second most followed game of the show on Steam and the sixth most wishlisted game on Steam. It's from Owlcat Games. They know what they're doing. People know who they are. It's based on an established universe. It looked a bit Mass Effect-y, but it's done really, really well. Another game that you talk about games you hadn't heard of. I at least remember ill, but I didn't.
There are things across my career at different publishers where you just knew you could say a word and it was like traffic gold. When I was at The Verge, one of our jokes was like fish content. If anything was about fish, for whatever reason, boom, instant.
Wow.
You find a way to tie The Verge and fish together and like you were swimming in it. And another one that I did not appreciate is The Expanse in entertainment coverage.
Oh, wow.
And I've heard this from a lot of different people. The Expanse's following is hardcore and they will show up. The second I saw that they were making this game, I just, very, very good sign, at least for that initial bump. Those people are going to show up day one and get that game.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on that one.
Yeah.
There were some clear winners, some big numbers on the showcases.
Can I ask you a kind of an industry question? Mm-hmm. Because I mean, this is like my chance while I'm on this show. Resident Evil 9. This one puzzled me to no end. Everything about it. Because we got the surprise announcement, which was cheeky, and like, I get that, and I like it. What I didn't expect was we were demoed it at Playdays. And did you have a chance to see?
I saw it. I didn't play the game. Some people played it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't see it. I didn't play it. I saw it. Yeah.
And I had a chance to see it. And what was absolutely peculiar about it is it feels like this game is like years away from release. There was not much to show, as in it is a Resident Evil game and they don't show combat. And it is one of those, like, they have one of these, and I feel like every one of the most recent modern Resident Evil games where you kind of do the indie horror thing of just hiding from a big, scary, unkillable thing. Perfectly neat. An absolutely strange decision, I felt, in terms of introducing the game to people, because it doesn't really show most of the mechanics of the game. And on top of that, it kept cutting away. It kept doing these like blackout moments where they'd be like, well, that's 30 seconds of the game, and here's another 30 seconds later on in that mission. And I don't, sometimes I see things, and I just, from an industry marketing level, I don't understand why I'm seeing them. And that was a big one for me.
I will give you my theory, but also a little bit about Capcom. So Capcom often release a game in what they call the Capcom slot, which is February, March. And they often ramp up their coverage from around the E3 before. And then they begin with something there, then they'll do something new at Gamescom. They probably release the thing we just saw as a demo, knowing them, like in September.
Yeah.
And then they do a big thing in like beginning of the year, and then they launch it. So in terms of the release cadence, the reason in terms of they show a little bit of it. So that demo is interesting because I was, if you read the Eurogamer piece, this is Alex Donaldson actually went and played the game. It was one of the few people that actually played it. And I spoke to him after he played it. I wanted to know all about it. So in that trailer, there's that bit where do you remember where they climb on like some trolley she climbs on some trolley to get a screwdriver off the top shelf. Do you remember this bit?
Yeah.
In the game, so he looks away and then suddenly the trolley's there. In the demo, you have to move the trolley to that position in order to climb it. When you move the trolley, things fall off the trolley and make a really loud noise, right? And then you hear the creature outside the door going, and it's sort of, and Alex told a story about how he turned his lighter off. He said, don't move. Don't make any more noise. Just do not move. Do not move. Waited for the noise to stop from the monster. Thought he could get going again. He lit the lighter and the monster was right there, right? And he squealed, right?
Show that! Show that! Like, I mean, let me be clear. I'm not even criticizing Capcom because I'm not that stupid, because nobody is on a heater right now more than they are. Like, they seem to know what they're doing, but it truly puzzled me.
I think the reason because here's the thing, they kept talking about this being a bold reinvention or a change of direction of the franchise.
Yeah.
And what we were shown was neither. right? And because it was a horror game.
Yeah.
We saw a horror game and we saw a monster stalking them. This is exactly what they did in Resident Evil 2. It's what they did in Resident Evil 3. It's what they did in Resident Evil Village, right? I've seen this and it's done very well and it's effective, and I'm a Resident Evil fan, so I was on board with it. My theory is they've shown everybody the horror of Resident Evil before they start getting us into what the combat's like and where perhaps it goes a little bit different to Resident Evil. So often you find companies do it the other way around. They show you a completely different game. Everyone goes, this isn't what I want. This isn't Resident Evil. I don't like this at all. And then they go, no, we're doing the other stuff too. And by then point, you may have lost people. And I think this is a way of going, well, reassure the fans, this is still the horror Resident Evil.
All right.
And then maybe when we get to Gamescom or whatever, they'll show us whatever that, bombed out Raccoon City segment's like or whatever.
I hope they let me go like punch a volcano. I'm bring back that Resident Evil. That'll be great.
No, don't bring that.
Yeah, you're right.
But yes, I suspect there's talk of it being a little bit more explorationary, and there's loads of speculation on what it could be. And I took it as this was more of a, don't worry, because they kept talking about it being a reinvention. Jeff said on stage, I saw their vision for it and I was blown away.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm blown away because I love this stuff, but it's Resident Evil.
That makes a lot more sense. I like that. Yeah.
That's my theory on it. I suspect the next stuff is going to look quite different. There are some numbers that aren't positive. So this proves that I'm not fully, because I was interested in what the media coverage was like, because it was facing some pressures, the media, over last year. Some of it's specific to this year that isn't going to be necessarily affected next year. So I got some data from Press Engine, which tracks all video game articles, and the keywords that are used in those articles. There are services out there that outside of Press Engine, Footprints, there's something similar. And I actually looked at Footprints' data and I compared the two, and it's roughly, so I'm relatively confident these numbers are, if they're not completely right, at least trends are the same. So Press Engine sent me the numbers of articles featuring the term Summer Game Fest between the start of May to June 12th. And that number was 5,653 articles across the internet on that term, those terms in particular. Which sounds great, but it's heavily down on the year before.
Yeah. Where
there was 9,761 articles that featured the term Summer Game Fest. This is across the board. If you look at the platform showcases, the PlayStation Showcase for the first 3 days after it aired, so the day it aired and the 3 days afterwards, it generated 2,186 articles. That's a drop on 3,035 articles published over the same period for the 2024 PlayStation State of Play. So again, a drop of nearly 900 articles. The Xbox Showcase, again, over 3 days, went from 6,675 articles in 2024 to 2,750 articles in 2025. I'm hoping I've got that right. That was absolutely huge drop there. There are some big reasons for this, some of which is unique to this year. One is there were fewer big games. The media outlets tend to focus on the big stuff, this, and if you compare this year to last year in terms of big AAA SEO-friendly titles, there just weren't as many. Another really big one that's particularly unique to this year was Switch 2. We revealed on the Game Business that press didn't receive pre-release hardware or games until the day the console came out. So they weren't able to get reviews and coverage of ready for the Switch 2 launch. And the Switch 2, of course, landed straight on top of Summer Game Fest. So I know at least of 2 media publications that had to pull back slightly from Summer Game Fest in favour of Switch 2 reviews and general coverage.
Yeah.
Also, there's things like embargoes to factor in. We've still got coverage going up now from the Play Days events. So these numbers aren't completely final. SGF was a little earlier last year. So all that needs to be taken into account. But the big one that isn't unique to this year is there's just a drop in media coverage for video games generally. And there's also a fall in websites covering video games. So for the Xbox Showcase this year, there were 640 publications that covered the event. That's a drop of nearly 400 publications over 2024. For the PlayStation State of Play event, the number of publications that wrote about that dropped from 835 to 604. So that's not quite as bad, but it's still a pretty big drop. And for Summer Game Fest all up, for the entire of May to early June, publication count went from 1,202 in 2024 to 833 in 2025. So again, almost a 400 drop in the number of places that use the term Summer Game Fest in their coverage. We spoke about this on the show about... Yeah, Cameron.
I'll just top in really quick. I mean, obviously, I, of all people, I'm not going to deny the changes that are happening to the games industry and outlets closing. But I would poke a few holes in these numbers, or at least I would want to push at them a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a few things that I see. I don't know if these are true. They're just the questions I, as a reporter, want to ask. One is the decrease in number of outlets that covered it. I know that last year there was a lot more streamers at Summer Games Fest and streamers who were covering it, and felt like a significant decrease this year, probably because I think streamers are realizing that they're not journalists and that these things are actually quite boring after you have the excitement of going to one for the first time. So I do wonder about that. The thing that I would say about the fewer articles, and why I'm always skeptical of numbers about just raw total articles published, is the value of an article. A single story on the internet changes month to month, let alone year to year.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean, I could say at Polygon in the past with something like this, we often would find that one great story that was a roundup per thing did infinitely better than 20 short stories combined on all those individual pieces. So if the goal here is eyes and attention on a game, it's not especially useful, in my opinion, if you said, hey, we went from 1,000 stories, then all of those stories got 500 views, to we went to 500 stories, but all of them got 20,000 views.
Yeah.
It just is tricky.
As worth noting, we're talking about public. There are a lot, if you look at the list of publications, if you look at the list that Press Edge, we did a piece a couple of months ago on this. Look at the list of, there are fewer outlets, and there's ones that we know about that have either cut down or disappeared. But there's a lot of really small amateur websites in countries, non-English speaking countries that, you may not even notice. There's a lot of the drop in publications is around that. You're right. I don't like to use these estimates of like the numbers of readers these articles apparently got, because I'm like, I don't really know how you work this out properly, really. But the number drop isn't quite so high in terms of the actual number of people reading it.
It's a forever problem with data in journalism and games, which I feel like makes your life, I just imagine, miserable in some ways. It's two places where they obfuscate everything. So you kind of have to like take the numbers that are available to you, because good luck finding any data.
Yeah. If you said to me at the beginning of this event, will there be fewer articles written about video games from Summer Game Fest this year? I would have said yes. Yeah. Simply for all the reasons that I stated above. It's not a surprise. And you're right. Here's the thing. I was at Video Games Chronicle. I ended up using they have they had a suite at Summer Game Fest, and I went there 3 times to do their podcast. And they were doing this, and they do still do this way, right? They sit there watching the press conference. Yeah. And they're writing up every story. And I thought to myself, I remember when I used to do that. Yeah. No, we don't do that anymore. We much rather do a really, like, everything that was announced. Like, people, it's interesting, the feedback I got, particularly from an industry publication, is that when they get the newsletter from GI and it's like 60 articles, whatever, they're like, oh, I can't keep up with that. They say, can't you just do me one story with everything in it so I can see it all at a glance? And so we moved to that model. We reduced our coverage of E3 at the time, probably about 75%. Yeah. With that strategy of having a big story that really just showed you everything, rather than having 50 small stories that sort of gave you a nub to play that SEO game. So it is, you're right. I suspect there's an element of strategy shift.
Yeah. And I expect we'll see it go down more and more too. Well, unless AI bots end up making the churn higher and higher. There's kind of two scenarios here. There's the human-made content and the robot content.
Yeah. But I still think it's important. And I think this is, I think the media element, we can focus on it. Oh, it's not, it's going down and down and down. But I still think it is important for the reasons that you give. I mean, it's great the direct-to-consumer stuff's doing well. And those numbers are much bigger. But I do think it's that translation, that media depth. I think people do look to that once they've gone through they've watched the trailer, but all that's interesting. They want to hear that follow-up. And I think you're right. I think that's important. And Jeff believes it. I know he's got the big direct event. Yeah. He's invested in this. Playdays is an event that he does with IM8-Bit, which is all about getting the media hands-on with these sort of things. I think it's important. And I'd like to see more companies really do that going forward. Don't take those numbers as a reason not to do it. Yeah. Take those numbers as a reason to do it.
Yes. Yeah, I'll just implore that even more. Again, yes, to invest even more in good stuff. Yeah. Like, if you do question those numbers, then the question should be if there are fewer places doing it, where are the places that are going to have great reach? Where are the places that are going to reach my audience in a compelling way? I think there used to be a bit of a kind of a shotgun blast approach of well, we do have 1 trillion outlets and they will write up literally everything. And now I think there's all the more reason for especially the publicity team or marketing team to have an amiable relationship with the press that is going to reach an audience, because they're rare and fewer than ever before.
I did see quite a few publishers sort of target a handful of, like the Resident Evil hands-on demo element was given to a very small selection of people. And I thought that was interesting, because that means that they went a bit harder on that game coverage than perhaps they might have done if they were one of 50, because they wanted to make the most of the fact they had some access and something interesting that perhaps they wouldn't have done if, I'm not saying they wouldn't have covered it, but they probably would have just put it in amongst all their other coverage. But you'll know more about that than me. I'll move on to our second subject.
Okay.
Summer Game Fest is a fascinating, we could talk about it for ages. There's so many segments to it and so many elements to that thing. And you're right, I think companies don't have to announce stuff during that week. I still think it's important to have a lightning rod moment where everyone pays attention to video games. But I think it's great that people, Borderlands did its thing at PAX. There'll be a bunch of stuff at Gamescom, a bunch of stuff at Tokyo Game Show. There'll be people doing standalone things. There will be, Nintendo will drop a direct at some point. I know they're just doing a Donkey Kong one. You don't have to follow that cadence, but it's still nice, I think, if your game does line up with that sort of summer window, there's a lot of people paying attention. And we saw some of the big wishlist winners that it can, when you have a few big games, not too many of them during Summer Game Fest or E3, other games can benefit. We often people used to say to me years and years ago that, oh, why would you announce your game at E3? Everyone's going to be covering the big Nintendo game, the big PlayStation game, the big Xbox game. When E3 went away, I actually had quite a few smaller publishers, AA publishers, indie publishers say to me that those people came in for those games and then they discovered the others.
Yeah.
There's a trickle-down effect. That's the reason why you've got games like Ill and stuff like that do really well, because people came in for maybe Resident Evil.
Yeah, I think it's developers and publishers knowing which is the right match for them. They're, like all of these, it's great that we have all these options now. I mentioned Ambrosia Sky earlier, that Soft Rains game. And here is a game that hardcore game players, game journalists are going to love. And you need to play in a very quiet environment. Mm-hmm. So, well, that means PAX is out, and you need to actually get people in the room to play the game, because it really benefits from being played. So where is that situation going to come up? We mentioned Pragmata. Like, to me, that's like a perfect game for this, for a larger publisher of, it really sings once you play it. Are you going to be able to get all the journalists to come out and do a trip to play this game? Maybe not. Where the big events, like, does Rockstar ever need to show up at these? No, like, Rockstar is going to be fine.
Yeah. Well, I'll move on, because I'm wary of the time and I've got so much more I want to talk about. And the other one is that we just had the biggest, fastest selling video game console launch of all time in the Nintendo Switch 2. Yeah. 3.5 million consoles sold in a matter of days. But we've been covering on the game business. We're talking about how we know Nintendo does well out of this stuff, but what about third parties? So I wanted to look into how third party games have done at the launch of Switch 2. And this is how well they've done. So Sakana, covering the US market, they revealed to me that 62% of Switch 2 physical software in the US was first party games. So 62% of games sold was basically Mario Kart and those Zelda Switch 2 editions. Now, you may think, why are you doing physical? Nintendo don't share digital data with any of the charts companies, so that doesn't help. But also, Switch is a heavily physical console. Across Europe, 80% plus of a new Switch game sales are physical. So it's the opposite to Xbox.
Yeah.
In that sense, a very physical platform. Now, Switch 2, I have been sent some data for some continental European territories. I'm not supposed to see this data, and I'm not going to give the figures on the podcast for that reason. I don't want to cause problems for any of the data companies. But what I'm going to say about it is that the digital things are pretty much similar for Switch 2 as there was for Switch 1. There's a couple of games that dip to sort of 70%, but most of them are 80% plus. Some of them even close to 90% of their sales were physical. So we're still looking at a heavily physical platform. But anyway.
Yeah.
So first-party games accounted for 62% of Switch 2 physical software sales during the launch week of Switch 2. CD Projekt ranked second in almost every market, with Cyberpunk, and Sega also did very well. Sega was number 3 in the US. Now, I say very well. This number does not include the bundle of Mario Kart World. GfK in the UK, they say 86% of software sales, of physical software sales for Switch 2 in the UK were of first-party games. So only 14% of games were third-party sales. If you take away Mario Kart, so you can take away the Mario Kart World Bundle. Mario Kart World Bundle is included in that stat. It's actually 48%. So the Mario Kart Bundle skews this quite a bit. For the launch, so in the US, for the launch of Switch 1, 81% of games sold were first-party games. That didn't have a bundle, obviously. And in the UK, the launch of Switch 1, 89% of sales were Nintendo games. So even if you take this UK number, 89% was for Switch 1 was first-party games, 86% for Switch 2 were first-party games. There's a slight shift there. That's probably more to do with the fact there's just more games. Switch 1's launch lineup was Zelda, Just Dance, 1-2 Switch, Skylanders, and Super Bomberman. That was the entire physical lineup for Switch 1. For Switch 2, there's a lot more. There's Hitman, there's Cyberpunk, there's Split Fiction, Hogwarts Legacy, Bravely Default, Yakuza 0, Sonic, Civilization. There's quite a few more games in there. These are just physical games. Well, Nintendo Welcome Tour isn't in there. I don't think these numbers are great at all. So Cyberpunk has done okay. It's the number 2, it's number 2 game behind Mario Kart. I understand in the UK, and I understand this is also true of all markets, or at least a lot of other markets, he has outperformed what The Witcher 3 did on Switch at launch. So, or the Switcher, as some people call it. It's certainly the biggest third-party launch. But we're still not talking mega numbers here. And there's some games that have done very poorly. There's some games that have done sub 100 units at launch of the Switch 2 when it comes to third-party before games. I'll do some caveats. Okay, Mario Kart is why people came in for Switch 2. 80% of Switch 2 sales were the Mario Kart bundle. So that's going to have actually people had a game straight away at launch. It's possible we're going to see people who will put down Mario Kart and then start looking around at what's new. So basing this purely on the launch week perhaps isn't entirely fair. There are no reviews for these games at launch. If you were trying to go, I've got Mario Kart, what else should I buy? What are the critics saying? We weren't saying anything. So there were no reviews.
Yeah.
So again, there might see a delayed effect on this. But this is my personal take on this. I've been speaking to a bunch of third parties in the build up to Switch 2. And, I spoke to Take-Two and Strauss Zelnick. They're very much asking Nintendo to deliver for them. They're saying, look, we've backed you. We've given you some games. Nintendo, you need to help us be successful on your platform. Otherwise, why would we keep doing that? Too many people come in for your games. How can we grow our games? But I still think they need to meet Nintendo halfway. The Switch audience is broader now. There are more adults that play Nintendo consoles than there were back in the 90s or whatever, when perhaps it was more of a kid's machine. But Switch users expect to be able to plug in their game and play it. That's what they expect, and they expect to be able to take it out with them. They expect it to be flexible. When you've got a game like Hitman, which requires online connectivity, and then also is a game key card, you have to download the thing, I don't think speaks to that audience effectively. I'm not surprised Cyberpunk is the number 1 third-party game, because we had CD Projekt on the show about a month ago. They really thought about what the Switch, they knew Cyberpunk's not the, isn't a kid's game, isn't a family game, but they knew the Switch audience might be interested in it if you can put the game on the cartridge, and if you can make sure that it adapts to both portable and the console environment. I just think Nintendo got to be careful. They've done this before, where they've sort of scaled back, or at least softened their focus on first party in order to push third party. I think that will be a mistake. People come into the Nintendo platform for Nintendo games, and then they discover the other games, and they might try the other third party games out. But I do think third party companies, too many of these games were these game key cards. I'm not against the idea of them. I just don't think they work. I just don't think they're not going to work that well on Nintendo format because of the expectation of that audience. And indeed, a lot of the games didn't do very well, and a lot of them were effectively digital download required titles. Did you play any third-party games on Switch? Did you have a Switch 2, Chris? Are you on board?
I do. I mean, the only thing that I've been playing outside of Mario Kart is Fast Fusion, which is the $15 indie game that is excellent. And I think I've seen in the top 10 on the digital store, but I don't know what that means in terms of sales.
No.
Again, it's hard for me to make sense of any of this for all the reasons you mentioned. I mean, just the fact that it costs so much. And then you buy Mario Kart, and maybe you buy a subscription to Nintendo Online. And at that point, are you really just in the mood to spend more money on a game that is old, right? Like that's the other part. These aren't new games. These are some of them that have already been out on the Nintendo Switch. So I don't quite get the appeal. I know that like Cyberpunk, I think, is very clever in that people who buy the Switch and only the Switch maybe haven't had a chance to play that. Do I think people who want to play the new Sonic or even Hogwarts Legacy, who also own a Switch, are the type of people who have made an effort to go play those games elsewhere? Probably, I think. But again, it's tough to know because the data is so invisible. The thing that I can't stop wondering about is, where is Ubisoft and what does this say about Ubisoft? Because Ubisoft had a reputation with Nintendo for a while of being the publisher that's going to make new weird things for the launch at Nintendo. You know, Nintendo always tries to woo different third-party partners, and it feels like a different set of them fall for it each time at the beginning of the console cycle. I remember ahead of the Wii U being shown Call of Duty and being told, this is the grown-up third-party Nintendo console. But Ubisoft was consistent. You know, you could expect a Red Steel, you could expect a Zombie U. They would have something kind of surprising. They seem to have a really good relationship with Nintendo, and now it feels like they're just trying to survive, hang on for dear life. And I imagine you can't make a lot of space for Wii or Switch 2 launch games when you're in that position.
Possibly. I mean, that Prince of Persia game they released last year, which I know didn't do great numbers, it sold best on Nintendo, right? It was I know it wasn't an exclusive Nintendo game, but it was I think the days of exclusive sort of over. It's worth noting the Mario and Rabbids team have largely disbanded, although Ubisoft Milan still exists. The people behind that game have gone and formed a new studio. I know they had pitched another title that didn't get approved. I don't know why, but it sort of never happened, which was, again, I think tied to Nintendo. So that sort of team was doing those sort of things. They do have Star Wars Outlaws coming, but I think I agree with you. I think it's easy. You can port your game to Switch 2 and you can probably find some players, and if you do it right, like Cyberpunk did it, you might be able to find an okay number of players. We had Matthew Ball on the show, said, look, your big audience isn't going to be on Switch 2. People were interested in Star Wars Outlaws, if they were interested in Elden Ring or anything like that, they would have bought them on the other machines. You can still do something on these platforms with those games if you want to, but if you really want to succeed on Switch, we've seen it. Like, people say Nintendo third-party games don't succeed on Switch. The traditional third-party games that we think of don't, but Lego games do. They do really well. Just Dance does super well. Hogwarts Legacy did massive numbers on Switch. You know, it came out much, much later, and isn't too far off PlayStation figures now.
Yeah.
And there are games that do very well. Indie games, because obviously a lot of indie developers are, I think, Nintendo inspired.
Yeah.
They do really well on Nintendo platforms. So there is definitely a market. There's definitely lots of third-party success to have, and it's worth noting that at the end of the Switch's life cycle, it got to the point where sales of first-party games and third-party games were evenly matched. You know, so it certainly hasn't been a great start. But as I say, and as you quite rightly say, there isn't actually a lot of things here. I was actually tempted by Hitman. I never played Hitman, but when I found out I had to be online for bits of it, I thought, well, sometimes I play at a coffee shop, and sometimes but anyway.
I kind of share my dream for indies on Switch too, because I don't think we live in the post-Steam Deck world, and I know not every casual person, normal, sane, healthy person has a Steam Deck or a Rogue Ally X or whatever. But it is a reality that, like, the bump that indie games got when Nintendo Switch original launched is different than Switch 2. I would love kind of like Super Mario All-Stars style packs of indie games that I could buy on the Switch 2 with a custom layer where I come in and it's like I picked my little arcade of 4 or 5 games. I am inspiring this largely on the Shovel Knight series, which I think has done versions of this. And again, I'm not talking about just like you buy it as a bundle in the store and then it's 5 games. I mean, a wholly like original standalone arcade experience inside of a piece of software. I understand that sounds like an extra layer of navigation for hardcore players that wouldn't be appealing, but I think there are real people who don't know what indie games are good or bad, especially when you go onto the Switch shop now. It is completely impenetrable in a gamble on what you're going to get quality-wise. And I think that developers need to start working together and finding solutions for how they present their work and how they curate their work. Because if the stores aren't going to do it, it's going to fall on them. So I'm hoping for something. I'm hoping for some creativity in terms of how games are actually distributed on the Switch to lest I think a lot of good stuff is going to get lost in this market.
There used to be, back in the physical retail days, okay, this was always in collaboration with the retailers, and Nintendo don't seem that interested, but they used to do things like, these are the BAFTA winners.
Yeah.
Here's the nominees for the Game Awards, and they sort of, whatever it is, they sort of did these celebrations, and often they were at reduced prices or in collections and stuff like that. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I'll call up video games. Get this done.
If you're listening, make that happen. Those are our big stories for the day. I do have some smaller stories, but we're sort of short on time, so I want to get through them relatively quickly. One of them is only relatively recently broken. It was broken on Wednesday. Xbox has partnered with AMD for future Xbox consoles. In a short video, Xbox President Sarah Bond said the deal is for future Xbox devices, including handhelds, consoles, and cloud. The multi-year partnership between Microsoft and AMD will see the two co-engineer silicon across several devices and AI-powered experiences within a platform that is not tied to a single store or device and fully compatible with your existing Xbox game library. I wrote about this already on the site. Again, I think we kind of gather this might be the direction of Xbox, but Chris, your initial reaction to that story?
Unsurprising, I think, is the general tenor here. I hope that they have ideas about how they're going to respond to what NVIDIA is offering. I think seeing how well things run on the Switch and how beautiful like fast fusion is, I don't know. I get the partnership. I get the history. We'll see how it goes.
My thing with it, and I did say this in the article, is this idea of an Xbox console that you can play your Steam games on, and basically Xbox becoming a PC that sits under your TV.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting future. Xbox has great strategies. I often think they do. I thought this Xbox Series XS strategy was a great one, but for some reason it doesn't always connect. Xbox has the games now, perhaps they didn't have the games back then.
It's a good pun.
Oh, yes. It always sounds good on paper. It's whether it can deliver on reality. The idea of Windows, it feels like I've gone back in time 25 years. The idea of gaming Windows being the heart of this. I spoke to a games exec. I did an interview with them, and afterwards they started talking about it, and he pulled a bit of a face at that. But, they're the biggest games publisher in the world right now. They speak to all different audiences, hardcore PC gaming audiences, casual players, everyone in between. If there's one company that can create a unified ecosystem that crosses mobile, console, PC, brings all those things together, splits those things up individually, it's the company behind Minecraft and Candy Crush and Call of Duty and World of Warcraft and Diablo. I just think it always sounds good on paper. I hope, Xbox had a bit of a rough time on the platform side of things, and I hope that it's, I'm paying attention. They're always interesting to write about. That's all I can say.
It feels like they've spent 15 years planning for the future. And now the future is here, and now we're going to see if that plan actually works.
Yeah, they are a company in a constant state of transformation. It always feels that. We don't have too much detail on this, but the US Actors Union, SAG-AFTRA, has suspended its nearly year-long strike and has instructed members to return to work on productions. It follows the announcement of a tentative agreement between the union and video game companies, including Activision, EA, Epic, Insomniac, and Warner Brothers. While the union has successfully managed to negotiate on a variety of critical issues, including wages in line with inflation, job safety, those sort of things, they weren't entirely happy with the protections against exploitative use of AI. But I think it sounds like they've reached an agreement on that now. AI is an interesting opportunity for the industry. We saw Darth Vader in Fortnite. All of this stuff is interesting to experiment with, but I think we do need to get this sorted from the start.
Yep.
We need to make sure artists are protected. We need to bottom this out. I think the whole industry wants that. Obviously, we don't have a lot of details on what these exact protections are, but it's nice that people can go back to work.
I have a tentative interview with a representative from this union that will tentatively run Friday for anybody who wants to hear it. We'll see. I am very curious because, again, I agree. They've been in negotiations for almost 2 years. They've been on strike since July of last year. I'm eager to hear what's going on because I do worry about the inability to get this right from the start, because I think the companies realize they also are very motivated to lock in the, I would say, anti-human approach now because it will be harder to seed that in the future. Rough times.
Speaking of rough times, Mindseye from Build a Rocket Boy has finally launched after a really unusual series of events ahead of its release. It arrived full of critical errors, bugs, and poor reviews. Eurogamer gave it 1 out of 5, GameSpot gave it 3 out of 10, IGN gave it 4 out of 10. I'm not one to pick on a game that doesn't deliver. That's not really what the show is about. But this story of this has been a bit of a strange one. They released a short gameplay. I don't know if you saw this, Chris. They released a short gameplay clip for the game about a month back. And the amount of people that texted to me and said, what the hell is this? It was really terrible demonstration of what this game was. They then followed that up with a better trailer. And I had 2 reactions to that trailer. One was they kept talking about what looked like pretty basic gameplay elements of like ducking behind a wall and stealth and controlling a robot as if it was some form of huge revolution in video games. And I was like, I've seen this 100 times before. That was my first reaction. The other reaction was, we don't get a lot of GTA clones anymore. I'd be quite up for this. But then the trailers did get better. But then we had co-CEO Mark Gerhard suggesting some of the negative coverage that Mindseye received was financed by someone. I think they're maybe implying former employers, as some people don't want Leslie or Build a Rocket Boy to be successful. Also, days before the game was due to be launched, Build a Rocket Boy's chief legal officer and chief financial officer both quit the firm. Leslie Wenzies, who runs Build a Rocket Boy, was at Summer Game Fest, but then didn't appear for some of his planned media appearances, which included talking at our event, The Game Business Live, which we held in LA. He'd gone home, he said, because of a family emergency. And now it's come out and it's a bit broken. My take on this story, and I could be completely wrong, but my take on this is that they had a really ambitious sort of metaverse vision for what was called Everywhere initially, which was the game they were making. This was before metaverse was even a term that we were using regularly. It's sort of the industry's gone through that metaverse fad and then come out the other side of it. Fortnite beat them to this user-generated content platform, which is what Everywhere was supposed to be. They pivoted to Mindseye being the heart of the product, lead with the game. With Mindseye sort of a game made using Everywhere. There's also a user-generated content bit after Mindseye. I think it's a bit of a confusing proposition. I suspect they've had to get the game out for financial reasons, but I feel that perhaps they've been buffeted a little bit by the winds of the industry, and what they've managed to come out with is not delivering on any front. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I was eager to get him at the show, because I wanted to talk about this journey they've been on and almost the series of unfortunate events they've had to contend with to get them here. But they do say that he still would appear on the show. I don't believe it, but it's certainly been a really tough time. And it's not a fun story in any way. There's 400 odd people who work at Build a Rocket Boy, and this is I've ended on quite a bleak one. It's not a happy result. They're saying they're fixing it, but I fear that with a game that's built, that needs community and needs people building stuff and making stuff, that they've got a real uphill battle now.
I would love a story on how games die. And that sounds really bleak. But what I mean by that is, like, we see so many different versions of how a game can be birthed into the world like this, which is, yes, this feels like obligations. It feels like contracts made this game into the world. The fact that there was an event at Summer Games Fest that was Hitman, but also this, which I had heard the event described by other members of the press as rough, to say the least, especially this part of it. The release of a video that clearly makes this game look bad feels like obligation. All of it just feels like we're hitting these notes because we have to. Then we have the opposite, where things seem to get canceled because of tax purposes and benefits. And then we have things where they just go on indefinitely. There are so many ways to play these, these kind of doomed projects, and none of them are good. And I always wonder behind the scenes how much of this is, yes, we are literally stuck in a paperwork loop, or we're trying to do the right thing, or we are trying to, save as much money as we can. There's so many different ways, and the kind of void of transparency makes it hard to really tell anyone's motives on this. And that's, I think, why you do get the mudslinging behind the scenes of like, well, it's actually this person's fault. Who knows? Who knows how any of this went down?
Yeah, I remember my first job in games was a games tester, and there was a game, it was a very good game, it was a PlayStation game actually, that came through the testing company 6 times over the course of 3 years, and it was largely finished when we first saw the test.
Yeah.
And I still never found out why that. It did come out eventually, long after. It was a PS2 game. It was long after the PS3 launch. But I still don't know why that just kept coming back. And I imagine there was some licensing issues or whatever that was causing it.
Yeah.
Or maybe the team got moved on to something else, or there was bound to be some internal story. Maybe it was just one guy was the one left over working on the title, and it was all down to him. But yeah, Chris, that's all we have time for. We are well over time, but I enjoyed chatting, and hopefully we can have you back on the show at some point in the near future.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
We'll definitely pay attention to your interview with the SAG-AFTRA representative.
Fingers crossed it all comes together.
We'll cut it out if it'll be too late by then. That's it for today's episode of the Game Business Show. We'll be back next week with another big executive interview. Until then, thank you for tuning in.